The Caliphate did not shatter in a single day, nor did its collapse come by the hand of a crusader or a Mongol. It was broken slowly, like a sacred text left to the wind, its pages torn by those sworn to protect it, its ink bled dry by the very pens that once preserved its glory. This story begins not with an army, but with a question, whispered in the courtyards of mosques, in the silence of prayer halls, in the dying breath of an imam executed for heresy. Who truly speaks? For God. It was a question that would divide cities, topple dynasties, and soak the earth of the Middle East in blood. In the early 9th century, the Abbasid Caliphate stood as the beating heart of the Islamic world, a vast empire stretching from the Atlantic coast of North Africa to the borders of India, shimmering with gold, guarded by slaves who rose to command armies, ruled from Baghdad, a city carved from dreams and ink. But beneath its polished grandeur, the empire seethed. The streets of Basra echoed with theological fury. In Kufa, scholars debated not with civility but with venom, their scrolls heavy with rage. And within the caliph's palace, behind curtains of silk and shadow, paranoia bloomed. The caliphate, founded on the blood of Umayyads and baptized in revolutionary zeal, was rotting at its core, and the man at the center of this gathering storm was a philosopher king in name, but a tyrant in practice, Caliph Alman. He was a man who loved Aristotle more than Abu Bakr, who carried both the Quran and Greek manuscripts in the folds of his robes. He believed knowledge was divine, even when it defied tradition, especially then. And in that conviction, he made a decision that would unravel the very legitimacy of the Islamic State. He declared that the Quran was created, not eternal, that it was fashioned by God like clay, not coexistent with him. To the average believer, this was abstract philosophy, but to the scholars of Baghdad, it was treason wrapped in theology, and to the military men of the empire, it was a spark to a fire they would never extinguish. The Inquisition that followed, the Minna, was not just a test of belief, but a campaign of control. Scholars were jailed, lashed, beheaded. Mosques were turned into tribunals. The word of the caliph became law, and dissent became death. But resistance stirred in silence, in the shadows of Samarra and the deserts of Khurasan. A new class of leaders began to emerge, not caliphs, not scholars, but warriors loyal to no bloodline, only to their sword and their pay. Turkish generals, barely fluent in Arabic, but fluent in ambition. They watched as the caliphs grew weak behind their libraries, and they sharpened their blades for the day they would rule in all. But name, the war that shattered the caliphate, did not begin with banners or horns. It began with silence, a silence that spread like plague. The silence of scholars too afraid to speak. The silence of sons buried before their fathers. The silence of unity cracking under the weight of truth. And so this is where we begin, not at the gates of Baghdad, but in its heart. As Caliph al-Mamun raises a pen to sign a decree that would ripple through centuries. A decree born not of conquest, but of pride. Of a ruler who believed he could bend truth to reason, and a world that refused to follow. For what shatters an empire more completely than the war it wages against itself? They came in the early dawn, cloaked not in armor, but in authority, bearing scrolls sealed with the caliph's emerald ring. Their weapons were not swords, but questions, and for many, that made them far more dangerous. The Minna had begun, not as a storm, but as a suffocating fog that slipped through every court, every madrasa, every alley where thought could breathe. Officially, it was a test, a formal inquiry into the beliefs of those who taught the faith, especially the jurists, the theologians, the imams. But the questions were knives dressed as philosophy. Is the Quran eternal, or was it created? And there was only one correct answer, the caliph's answer. Those who complied were rewarded with courtly favor, with titles and gold. Those who resisted were stripped of their robes, their freedom, their breath in Baghdad. A scholar named Ahmad ibn Hanbal sat motionless as the question was posed to him for the first time. He was no rebel, no firebrand, but a man of books and bruises, his back already bent from years of study and self-denial. Yet when the judge asked him if the Quran was created, he did not hesitate. The Quran, he said, is the uncreated word of God. It is as eternal as he is. It was not defiance for its own sake. It was belief, raw, absolute, immovable, and for the belief, he would be lashed until his skin hung loose from his bones. Ahmad was only one of hundreds. Anish Shapur, a famed theologian, chose silence rather than speak the caliph's words. He was buried alive beneath the foundation of a new mosque, his name forgotten, but his bones a permanent cornerstone of coarse truth in Damascus. Entire schools were shuttered, and those who taught in secret did so with ink made from soot and blood, their scrolls hidden in walls, their voices reduced to whispers in the dark. But the Inquisition did not merely terrorize the faithful, it fractured the empire itself. The people of Basra mocked the caliph's decree in graffiti scratched into sandstone. He who says the Quran is created will one day claim that God himself is a myth. In Egypt, local governors refused to enforce the order. Even within the ranks of the caliph's court, unease spread. Generals and bureaucrats, many of them from distant lands and foreign tongues, watched with growing suspicion as Baghdad consumed itself in metaphysical warfare. The Turks, recent recruits to the elite guard, warriors from the steppes baptized in the empire's coin, began to murmur in their own language. To them, theology was irrelevant, strength was the only scripture, and the caliph, for all his knowledge, looked increasingly like a man lost in his own thoughts, unable to command the loyalty of men who wielded steel instead of syllables. Yet Al-Mun pressed on. He sent emissaries to all corners of the realm, demanding declarations of orthodoxy. He opened the doors of the House of Wisdom wider than ever, inviting philosophers to debate, to argue, to refine, and in doing so, he blinded himself to the rot beneath. For every scholar he lifted with patronage, another was destroyed with fear. The empire became a house divided, not between Sunni and Shia, or Arab and non-Arab, but between those who believed the truth could be commanded and those who believed it must be discovered. This was no longer a matter of theology. It was control. And empires built on control do not fall with a shout. They fall with a flick of a pen, with the tightening of a rope, with the turning of one brother's face from another in silence. Behind the curtains of the palace, Al-Mamun grew restless. Letters arrived daily, some pledging loyalty, others veiled in defiance. Rumors reached his ears of soldiers grumbling in Samarra, of provinces dragging their feet in enforcement, of whispers that perhaps the caliph had gone too far. But the philosopher ruler could not retreat. He had wagered his legitimacy not on the sword, but on truth, and so to admit error was to surrender all. And thus, he doubled down. More trials, more executions, more edicts, more scholars broken. Beneath the wheel of belief, the blood of the faithful began to seep into the bricks of the empire's most sacred buildings. But belief, once spilled, does not disappear. It soaks. It stains. It remembers. The caliph had intended to unify the realm under a single intellectual creed. Instead, he had fed it a poison that now crept into every joint of the body politic. It was no longer a question of who believed what. It was now a matter of who ruled and who refused. And in the deserts east of Baghdad, far from the libraries and tribunals, a man of no noble birth, a Turk with no allegiance to books or bloodlines, watched from the saddle of his horse. He saw the empire turning inward, gnawing at its own flesh, and he smiled. The war had not yet begun, but the crack had formed. In the name of protection, the caliph summoned wolves. He called them guardians, protectors of the faith, defenders of the house of Abbas. But they did not kneel to the Quran, nor to the dreams of Baghdad, They knelt only to steal and to coin. They were the Gilman, slave soldiers of the Turkic plains, captured as boys or sold by chieftains hungering for silver, then trained in the arts of war beneath the banners of a distant faith. They came from the steppes of Transoxiana, from the edges of the known world, where the wind carved its own god and loyalty was measured not in bloodlines but in survival. And now, they bore the seal of the Caliph, Alman. In his desperation to secure power amidst the growing unrest, saw in them an answer, a force untouched by tribal loyalty or Arab resentment. Men without theology, without scholars whispering, poison in their ears. To him, they were clean, tabula rasa, instruments of order. But to history, they would become the blades that sliced through the very neck of the Caliphate. He brought them into his court in growing numbers, gave them horses, gold, and power. He built for them separate quarters, far from the whispers of the Arab nobility, and trained them to respond to one voice only, his own. They were loyal, yes. But loyalty bred of coin is loyalty that must be constantly purchased. And the more he fed them, the hungrier they grew. The city watched with unease. These foreigners, rough-faced, unfamiliar, speaking harsh syllables that cut through the air like hooves on dry stone, were given posts of honor, commands in the army, roles in court, even dominion over scholars who once dictated the fate of law and society. And all the while, the religious class, already bruised from the Inquisition, saw the empire becoming unrecognizable, not ruled by descendants of the Prophet, but guarded by ghosts of the steppe. But the Caliph could not see it, or would not. He believed he was shaping an enlightened empire, protected by warriors, guided by philosophers, administered by men who saw further than the petty concerns of the old world. But the empire he ruled was not made of ideas. It was made of people, of towns terrified into silence, of scholars broken in their pulpits, of provinces too weary to obey. And now, it was guarded by men who did not understand what they were guarding, only that they held the sword and that the sword opened doors. In the years following the first wave of the MENA, the Turkish guard expanded rapidly. From a few hundred to thousands, their camps, once outside the city, crept closer to the heart. Their commanders began to speak less like servants and more like satraps, and the Caliph, ever the philosopher, remained consumed by his debates, convinced that truth, if wielded precisely, would bend the world into harmony. But truth does not command armies, power does. And in elevating the Gilman above the old military aristocracy, he had made enemies of his own commanders. Arab generals who had once marched proudly under Abbasid banners now gritted their teeth, as their orders were questioned by tattooed nomads half their age. The court itself became a maze of factions. Arab nobility seethed in back chambers. Persian scribes whispered of ancient grievances. The Turks laughed among themselves, sharpening their knives and perfecting the quiet art of watching. And the Caliph, cloaked in his scrolls, defended by men who neither read nor prayed, grew ever more isolated. The cracks deepened. In the provinces, governors sensed weakness. In Khorasan, a once loyal satrap refused to enforce the religious edicts of the center. In Egypt, a revolt flared briefly before being drowned in blood. In Mecca itself, preachers began to speak openly of the Caliph's errors, not just in theology, but in character. And always, the question remained, who truly ruled the empire? The Caliph, lost in thought, the generals who carried his banners, or the Gilman, who stood silently behind him, eyes fixed not on the heavens, but on the throne. In 833 CE, the same year that saw al-Munah's death, a rumor passed through the alleys of Baghdad like a curse, that the Caliph had been poisoned, not by rebels or traitors, but by his own guard. History does not confirm it. Officially, he died of fever. But when the man who dies is the same man who created an empire of silence, the truth is always buried too deep to exhume. He was succeeded by his brother, Al-Mu'tasim, a man of simpler mind, more soldier than scholar, and where Al-Mun had tried to rule through ideas, Al-Mu'tasim ruled with muscle. He gave the Turks even more power, built them a new capital, Samarra, far from the muttering mouths of Baghdad. He made them not just guards, but governors, not just tools of power, but power itself. And the scholars, battered by a generation of inquisition, found themselves irrelevant. The pen had lost to the sword, but the sword had no master now. The Turkish guard was no longer a loyal pet. It had become a predator, one that had tasted authority and found it sweet. And what follows in this story is no longer a debate over belief. It is the slow, brutal unraveling of the caliphate's very bones, a state devouring itself, each limb fighting the other, while the wolves close in. The war had begun, and it was not a war of empire versus invader. It was a war within, the soul of the empire itself. A war between vision and vengeance, between scroll and scimitar, between those who remembered what the caliphate was meant to be. They let him out in chains, not because he was a traitor, but because he had refused to kneel. His name was Ahmad ibn Nasr al-Khuzai, a scholar, a jurist, and a man of quiet conviction. He had no army, no wealth, no banners raised in rebellion. All he had was a single sentence: the Quran is not created. And for this, the Caliph ordered his death. But this time, the execution did not silence dissent. It shattered something deeper, because Ahmad was not a fringe figure. He was respected, even revered, a man whose reputation stretched from the prayer halls of Kufa to the souks of Damascus. His death, by strangulation in the bowels of the Caliph's court, was not merely political, it was theological assassination, and word of it spread like wildfire through the veins of the empire. In the mosques, worshippers wept openly. In the markets, rumors clung to every coin exchanged that the Caliph had become a tyrant not only of the state, but of the soul, and within the ranks of the military, both Arab and Turk. Something shifted, for if a man could be killed for belief, what shield did loyalty provide? Al-Mu'tasim, unlike his brother, lacked the gift of intellect to clothe his tyranny in philosophy. He ruled bluntly, harshly, with little patience for nuance, and he leaned more heavily than ever on his Turkish guard, who now strutted through the palace not as servants, but as silent kings. Their leader, a ruthless commander named Ashinas, became the real voice behind the throne, giving orders, appointing governors, even dispensing justice. The Caliph was no longer a caliph. He was a symbol wrapped in gold and guarded by men who did not fear him. And beyond the walls of Samarra, the empire sensed it, that the heart of the Abbasid world had stopped beating, that the dream of unity, of a single ummah guided by divine light, had been replaced by cynical pragmatism, by bribes, by mercenaries who spoke no Arabic and read no Quran. Revolts followed, not coordinated, but erupting like sores across the empire's body. In the mountains of Tabaristan, a Zaydi imam rallied the disaffected, preaching that the true line of the prophet had been usurped. In Baghdad itself, riots broke out, furious crowds tearing down banners bearing the Caliph's name. And in the far west, the province of Ifriqiya, long neglected and heavily taxed, declared near independence. The Caliph sent armies. Sometimes they succeeded. More often, they did not. But each time, the cost grew heavier, not just in coin, but in trust. The people no longer believed that Baghdad could save them, and perhaps, more dangerously, neither did the army. Al-Mu'tasim died in 842, leaving the throne to his son Al-Wathiq, a ruler of cultured tastes but little backbone. He revived the Minna with a scholar's precision, but a tyrant's intolerance. His court became obsessed with theological surveillance. Spies infiltrated prayer circles. Imams were dragged from pulpits, and the prison swelled with men whose only crime was refusing to utter a sentence. They did not believe, but the walls were closing in. The Turkish commanders, once tools of the Caliphate, were now its architects. They appointed their own to high office. They chose which petitions reached the throne. They decided who lived and who vanished. And Al-Wathiq, too weak to oppose them, merely watched as the empire slipped further into their grasp. His death, likely natural, though rumors claimed poisoning, left a void, one that would be filled not by election nor lineage, but by military consensus. The Turks now held the reins. They met in secret, behind curtains, and chose the next caliph, Al-Mutawakkil, a man they believed could be molded. But they miscalculated. Al-Mutawakkil, though placed on the throne by soldiers, despised their dominance. He ended the Mena, restoring dignity to the scholars. He reasserted Sunni orthodoxy, curbing the excesses of rationalist theology. And he began, quietly, to sideline the Turkish commanders, stripping them of titles, undermining their authority, replacing their loyalists with Arab bureaucrats and Persian viziers. It was a noble effort and a suicidal one. In 861, as he dined in his palace beneath a flickering oil lamp, his Turkish bodyguards entered quietly and drew their daggers. He was stabbed where he sat, his blood soaking into the cedar wood of his private chamber. His own son, Al-Munasir, was placed on the throne, a puppet installed not by divine right, but by cold steel. And in that moment, the caliphate changed forever. No longer was the caliph the leader of the Ummah. He was a hostage, a figurehead, a man cloaked in silk, guarded by killers who whispered in foreign tongues. The sinner had fallen, the heart was ash. The war had ceased to be about ideas or faith. It was now about survival, about which hand would control the puppet and which hand would be cut off next. There was no declaration, no trumpet blast, no parchment nailed to a wall announcing the fall of empire. The caliphate did not collapse in thunder. It decayed in silence. The year was 862, and the man who now sat on the throne, Al-Munasir, wore the robes of his father, but not his resolve. He had watched his father, Al-Mutawakkil, bleed out beside a wine jug, murdered not by rebels, not by foreign invaders, but by his own guard. And he had learned the lesson: rule, if at all, only at their pleasure. Speak, if at all, what they wish to hear. He became the first caliph to reign as a servant of his own protectors, a title unspoken, but understood. His reign lasted only months. His name now little more than a footnote, but his brief, broken rule marked the beginning of a deeper truth. The caliphs no longer governed. The Turkish military did. Ashina's was dead, but his legacy had multiplied. Turkish commanders now dictated court appointments, sacked ministers, shuffled caliphs like chess pieces. They controlled the treasury. They owned the barracks. They chose who guarded the palace and who walked into it never to return. Baghdad wept for the loss of its golden age. Samarra, built to house the caliphate's military aristocracy, had become a haunted capital. Inside its walls, the Turkish guard erected private fortresses, quarters larger than those of the caliph himself, and outside those walls, the empire burned slowly. The provinces began to drift. In Ifriqiya, the Maghreb of today, the Aghlabids ruled in all but name. Their coins still bore the caliph's image, but their armies answered to no one in Baghdad. They taxed, they executed. They built palaces in Kairouan without permission or fear. In Egypt, the Ptolemies were rising, Turkish officers who sensed what their brothers in Samarra already knew. That loyalty to a distant, captive caliph meant little. Better to rule directly. In the eastern mountains of Persia, the Saffarids, forged from humble origins in Sistan, began to conquer city by city, calling not for rebellion, but for justice. They promised order where the caliphate offered only silence. They spoke the people's tongue, understood their hunger, and made no apology for rejecting a throne that no longer ruled. And all across the empire's spine, from the Tigris to the Indus, governors began to act as kings. They raised armies of their own, minted currency, held court. At first, they did so in the caliph's name. Then, they stopped mentioning him at all. The house of Abbas still held Friday sermons in his honor. The kupa still bore the caliph's title. But the words were hollow, like prayer without faith. Back in Samarra, the caliphate resembled less an empire and more a corpse preserved for ceremony. Caliphs were installed and removed at the will of generals. In some cases, they reigned for only months before being quietly poisoned, strangled in their beds, or sent away to die in forgotten towns. The palace, once the seat of the world's most powerful man, had become a prison of silk and whispers, and the people knew it. In Baghdad, the scholars spoke of a new age, not of unity, but of fitna, civil strife. They remembered the prophets, warning that a time would come when leadership passed into the hands of the unworthy. That time, it seemed, had arrived, yet not all despaired. Some believed this chaos was merely a turning, that the caliphate could still be redeemed, that a strong hand might emerge, one with both sword and scripture. But each year, that hope dimmed, for with every new caliph enthroned by force, with every new province that broke away, the truth grew louder. The war had been won by those who were never meant to lead. The Turks, once slaves, had become kings in everything but name. And the Abbasids, descendants of the prophet's uncle, once hailed as restorers of justice, had become relics, priests in palaces, ghosts in gold. The ideological heart of the empire, the unity of faith and governance, was gone. In its place stood a fractured realm of warlords, philosophers, rebels, and rulers too wise to call themselves caliph. The borders of the empire, once drawn with confidence across 3 continents, began to curl inward like a burning map. And as each province slipped away, the center grew heavier, loaded with memory, but hollow with fear. This was no longer an empire. It was a memory kept alive by men too afraid to bury it. And somewhere, deep in the libraries of Baghdad, an old scholar dipped his pen in ink and wrote a single line. We are ruled by those we once ruled, and we call it peace. The boy's name was Ali ibn Isa, born to an ailing bureaucrat in the suburbs of Baghdad. His cradle was a parchment-strewn desk, and his lullabies were the whispers of scribes and the scratching of quills. By the time he was 10, Ali could recite the tax codes of 3 provinces and had memorized the correspondence between the viziers of the last 3 caliphs. He was not a soldier. He had never held a sword. But history does not always place daggers in the hands of warriors. Sometimes it places them in the ink-stained palms of accountants. And when the Banu Farhat faction returned to power in Baghdad, Ali ibn Isa rose through the ashes of their enemies like a candle in a mausoleum. The year was 913 CE, and the caliphate, though clothed in gold, was bleeding internally. The frontier campaigns drained the treasury. The Turkic slave soldiers, now numbering in the thousands, demanded payment in silver they did not earn, and in loyalty they did not offer. In the east, the Saffarids mocked the caliph's weakness. In the west, the Fatimids plotted from Ifriqiya with a holy fire in their eyes. In the center sat Baghdad fractured, bloated, and decadent. Ali ibn Isa, brilliant and unyielding, became vizier again under al-Muqtadir, and he did what no one dared. He cut the army's budget. He slashed payments to generals who dined on pheasant while the people starved on lentils. He shut down the palatial gardens. He dissolved entire departments. And the Diwan, saying, letting, not blood, rebuild the caliphate. But ink has its enemies. And in the shadows, the Turkish generals sharpened their resentment like knives. They whispered that Ali was a traitor, a miser, a eunuch of ambition who served no god but the ledger. His rival, Ibn al-Farhat, a man as cunning as he was corrupt, waited patiently, feeding coins and flattery to soldiers, poets, and preachers alike. For Baghdad was not merely a city of stone and scholars, it was a furnace of politics, where every whisper was a match and every rumor could birth a rebellion. The bureaucracy, once the proud spine of the empire, was now a stage for vengeance and vanity. And as the Caliph signed decrees with one hand, he wept behind the curtain with the other, isolated, manipulated, and drowning in a palace that had become a prison of silken chains. Outside, the streets murmured, clerics spoke of divine wrath, markets buzzed with tales of famine and ghost cities in Khurasan and Ali ibn Isa, surrounded by ledgers, never looked up to see the noose tightening around the throne. He tried to save not with swords, but with sense. Baghdad begins to decay from within, not with loud panic, but with a slow, silent unraveling that you feel in the streets, in the court, in the diwan where you work. The rivalry between viziers Ali ibn Isa and Ibn al-Farad has grown into a fracture that splits the empire's bureaucracy. Like a crack in marble, the young Caliph al-Muqtadir, barely more than a boy, sways between them like a reed in the tiger's, first backing Ali's austerity, then drowning in Ibn al-Farad's velvet and bribes. Ministers come and go, exiled and recalled in a dizzying blur, while whispers of military betrayal echo louder each day. Mu'awiz al-Qadim, the Turkic general, becomes a name uttered with both fear and reverence, said to be plotting behind the scenes or perhaps holding the empire together by sheer force. Provinces like Khurasan and Ifriqiya begin to slip away, refusing taxes, resisting commands, raising their own banners. In Tunisia, the Fatimids rise, claiming divine descent, sending silver-tongued preachers eastward like sparks toward dry timber. And yet Baghdad dances. Every Friday, sermons urge patience, while each night brings music, feasts, and illusions of stability. You attend one such feast, watching a blind singer croon tales of the old caliphs while no one listens, and you sip wine under flickering lanterns, wondering if this is what it felt like in Rome before the fall, if there was music, too. Just before the gates gave way, outside, the Tigris flows past silently, as the war to come, a war not of faith or invasion, but of ambition, ego, and the empire's own blood begins to boil beneath the surface. The war does not arrive with drums or banners, it arrives in memoranda, in sealed letters, and orders sent from behind gilded curtains. You are there when the first of them is read aloud in the Diwan. The Caliph al-Muqtadir commands General Mu'awiz al-Qadim to march eastward, to suppress a rebellious governor. But the tone is cautious, almost pleading, as if the ruler fears his own commander more than the enemy. The corridors of power begin to warp, men whispering behind lattice screens, servants bribed to reveal pillow talk, scribes like he paid double to copy one version of events while hiding another. It becomes clear that the Caliph no longer trusts his army, and the army no longer respects the Caliph. When Mu'awiz returns victorious, Baghdad greets him not with cheers but silence. He does not bow low at court. He does not ask for permission. You watch him ascend the palace steps, flanked by loyal guards, while the Caliph's own eunuchs tremble. In time, the unthinkable becomes inevitable. Mu'awiz forces al-Muqtadir to abdicate, then reinstates him a week later. The throne is now a puppet stage. The Caliph's robes a costume, his crown an empty symbol. You see it in his eyes one morning as he passes through the courtyard, avoiding the gaze of even the birds perched on the colonnades. Still, official scribes like you are made to copy decrees, praising Mu'awiz as sword of the state and protector of the Ummah. But the people outside the walls know better. They say the Caliphate is bleeding itself dry, that the house of Abbas has become its own executioner. And you scribe, witness, sleepless ink-stained soul are left to record it all with hands that tremble as the lines blur. Between fact, fear, and fiction, the skies over Baghdad begin to dim, not from storm or eclipse, but from a deepening sense of collapse that creeps like rot through the timbers of empire. You begin to hear of provinces slipping away, not in rebellion, But an indifference governor's no longer sending tribute. Commanders refusing orders, borders fading into rumor. The palace is a husk now, its corridors echoing with footsteps of messengers bearing bad news. In the shadowy mornings, you walk past the Bab al-Tuq gate and hear merchants muttering about gold losing weight, and officials demanding taxes in flour instead of diners. The Friday sermons grow sharper. Stranger, imams begin to speak not just of God, but of the sins of rulers and the rise of false caliphs. You transcribe these words for the record, but another hand comes behind you and strikes out the dangerous lines. By now, you know the game. Every truth has its version, every version its buyer. Rumors swirl of Mu'minah's plotting to take the throne, outright, of secret meetings with Turkic generals and Persian financiers, of night barges on the Tigris filled with crates, not of grain or dates but of weapons and scrolls. Al-Muqtadir, still draped in silks and ceremony, spends his days composing poetry and inspecting falcons, trying to outdream the dying world. But you see the cracks in his mask when he thinks no one watches, in his trembling voice at court, in the way his guards now look not outward, but inward toward him. One dusk, you pass a corridor and hear him whisper to his mother, "Have we been forgotten by God?" And though you are just a scribe, trained to copy without judgment, that question lodges in your chest like a splinter. For you, too, begin to wonder not if the empire will fall, but if it already has, and no one noticed. The city's pulse slows. Once, Baghdad had thundered with a clash of scholars, the laughter of boys in Quranic schools, the haggling cries of spice merchants, the chants of sailors on the Tigris. Now silence pools in alleyways like stagnant water. You pass the house of wisdom, its gates locked, its courtyard choked with wind-blown leaves. The astronomers have vanished. Their instruments rust beneath tarps. The great translation halls are dark, scrolls scattered like bones. You once dreamed of copying knowledge into permanence, of catching the stars in ink, but now you copy royal decrees no one reads, laws no one obeys. The caliph's seal still impresses wax, but the wax crumbles before it dries. Meanwhile, in the taverns and under lantern-lit bridges, men whisper the names of rival claimants. One is a cousin of the caliph, another a warlord with Sufi pretensions. They speak of the Fatimids rising in Egypt, of Zanj ghosts stirring again in Bashar's marshes, of the Byzantine hawks circling ever lower. In the mosque courtyards, even the pigeons seem fewer, and on the wall of your chamber, a crack splits. The plaster from floor to ceiling a quiet line that widens each day, too slow for the eye to catch in motion, yet too steady to deny. You stop praying for the empire's return. You begin praying for the souls inside it, for the children who will grow old not remembering what the caliphate meant, only what its ruins felt like. One night, you dream of fire not the bright kind, but the smothering one, the sword that rolls in smoke and leaves no embers behind. When you wake, you find ash on your sill, though no fire burned nearby. You begin to hear strange rhythms in the night, soft drums from beyond the river, where refugee camps swell like tumors outside the crumbling city walls. Their beat is not martial, but mournful, pulsing like a slowed heartbeat of the Ummah. You don't know who plays them. Some say they are Sufi mendicants mourning the death of divine order. Others claim they are slaves who survived the Zanj rebellion and now chant dirges for a caliphate that once enslaved them. On your walks, you begin to notice markings on walls, a crescent inside a broken circle, drawn in charcoal or scratched with nails. Some say it is the sign of the secret faithful, others that it belongs to a group of iconoclasts waiting to tear down what little remains. The baker across from you, who once fed soldiers and scribes alike, now sells only coarse bread from behind a barred window. He has stopped asking after your health. The air has changed till there is the smell of rot, not just from the dying palms, but from within the people themselves, as if something spiritual has begun to decay, unnoticed but irreversible. At night, your dreams multiply, collapsing libraries, Caliphs in blood-soaked robes, children trying to read from blank pages, and always the drums. You once dismissed them as distant noise, but now they feel like prophecy. Then, one evening, the drums stop. The silence is immediate, so thick you find yourself holding your breath, listening for their return. But they do not come. Instead, the musician's call sounds thin and lonely across the rooftops, echoing as if across a void. That night, something shifts. People do not open their windows. The stars themselves seem distant, like eyes turned away in sorrow. In the morning, the river has changed color. The Tigris runs dark silt choke, some say, but others whisper, of blood upstream. Rumors arrive like dying birds. A garrison to the north has vanished, their banners found torn and tangled in reeds. A rival prince has declared a new caliphate in the ruins of Samara, draped in black. Crowned in verses of rage, you return to your desk, where a half-written legal brief lies beside a candle stub. You can no longer recall why the decree mattered. The seal feels absurd in your hand, like a relic from a dead god outside. The sky has taken on a yellow hue, the color of old bruises, or of parchment too long left in the sun. As the wind rises, it carries a sound you cannot name. It is not the drums. It is not war cries. It is something older, like the grinding of history folding in on itself. You close your eyes and whisper the basmala, though your tongue feels dry, and your memory of the words wavers like smoke dot at dawn. The gates are found open. No one knows who unbarred them. The guards are missing, not slain, not bribed, just gone. Dust lies thick on their abandoned posts. The streets inside the city remain eerily calm, but there is a scent on the breeze that reminds you of fire. Though no smoke can be seen, people begin to emerge from their homes, cautiously, like animals testing a broken cage. But they do not speak. Even the children are silent, clinging to their mothers with wide, unsleeping eyes. You walk to the main square, where once scholars debated under fig trees, and see that the trees have been stripped bare not just of fruit, but of bark, their bones pale in the morning light. In the center of the square, someone has placed an object atop the fountain, a scroll, sealed with red wax, unopened. No one touches it, no one claims it. It is a message, perhaps, from those beyond the river or from the unseen hand that now directs the city's fall. Your companion, the old grammarian with shaking hands, mutters something beside you. You lean in. This, he says, is what it sounds like when the caliphate forgets its own name. You do not ask what he means. The words make too much. Since the night, the wind changes. It blows in from the ruins beyond the eastern marshes, carrying with it not sand, but the bitter ash of something long dead. You cannot sleep, though you try. The city groans and its bones doors creak where no breeze touches them. Minarets sway ever so slightly, as if listening for orders that will never come. From your rooftop, you see lanterns flickering far beyond the walls, moving in slow patterns, like a procession or a siege or both. The stars are gone now, hidden behind a velvet sky heavy with sorrow. Somewhere below, a woman begins to wail. It is not grief. It is not fear. It is the sound of one who has seen something holy break. You clutch your robes around you and recite verses meant to protect travelers at sea. It feels appropriate, though. No ships sail the streets of Baghdad, yet you are adrift. All of you are. In the courtyards of the old palace, jackals walk in plain sight. They do not run. They do not fear you. One of them pauses before the broken threshold of the library, lifts its head to the sky, and howls not in hunger, but in memory. You understand. You, too, are made of memories gnawed out by morning. Proclamations appear nailed to every door, though no one saw who posted them. The ink is fresh, the parchment clean, the script meticulous in its cruelty. Loyalty, it reads, is measured in silence. Dissent will be considered nostalgia. Nostalgia is treason. You read the lines again and again, trying to find meaning, or perhaps mercy. But there is none. The scribes who once copied poetry in the mosque courtyard have vanished in their place. Young boys in black tunics march in stiff, wordless rows, eyes forward, hands clenched at their sides. They carry no weapons. But somehow, that makes them more frightening. You walk through the spice bazaar, hoping for some sign of life, but the air smells only of metal and damp cloth. Stalls are shuttered. The pigeons that once nested on the minaret have flown, their absence more profound than their song. And yet, life continues stubbornly. A boy feeds dates to a blind goat. An old man sharpens a broken penknife, muttering a prayer for his son who left and never returned. In these quiet acts, you see something stronger than resistance, something older than empire. It is not hope. It is not defiance. It is simply survival, unadorned and enduring. And in this, you feel the caliphate not in power or marble, but in the quiet breath between one fall and the next dot at midday. Smoke spirals above the southern gate, not the thick black cloud of fire, but the pale, steady plume of something ceremonial, controlled, intentional. You walk toward it without deciding to, as if summoned by instinct or ancient memory. Others do the same, emerging from shuttered homes and crumbling doorways like ghosts drawn to a drum. At the old execution square, now renamed a dozen times, and a dozen decrees, a stage has been raised. Upon it stands a single man, blindfolded but upright, hands unbound. He is not weeping. He is not begging. He is reciting a verse softly, calmly, about rivers that remember the names of every city. They pass. The guards do not interrupt, not yet, around you. The crowd listens, not breathing, not blinking. When the scimitar falls, it does so without ceremony. The body crumples, the head rolls. A moment passes, then two, and someone begins to clap. Just once, just one hand meeting another. But it spreads, first in defiance, then in grief, then in rhythm, as if the city itself, long silenced, has remembered how to speak. The guards raise their hands, uncertain. The smoke continues to rise. You turn away before the next blow, but the image has already etched itself into your bones. You will carry it with you, like an ember under ash, until the day Baghdad learns how to dream again. That night, the city does not sleep, not out of fear, nor out of festivity, but something stranger, older. The silence is brittle, like a pane of glass stretched to thin. Somewhere, a reed flute plays, just once, and then vanishes into the wind. You sit beneath a collapsed archway, the stars half hidden behind the soot-veiled sky, and you think of all the things that have gone missing. The scholar who taught without ink, the baker who told stories with every loaf, the woman who laughed so loudly in the hammam that even the walls echoed her joy. Where are they now? Buried, exiled, forgotten, or simply transformed into memory? A child passes, barefoot, clutching a wooden sword carved from an old table leg. He salutes you solemnly, as if you were a general, or perhaps a ghost. You nod, not knowing which you are. In the distance, a door creaks open and does not close. The city is open to wide-eyed, wounded, waiting. Above it all, the crescent moon hangs like a blade balanced on thread, glinting faintly. Tomorrow may bring fire, or snow, or surrender. But tonight, Baghdad remains. Not the Baghdad of banners and palaces, but the Baghdad of breath and ash, of waiting and remembering. And as you close your eyes, you do not dream of victory. You dream only of rain, soft and slow, washing the blood from the marble one drop at a time. By morning, the sky is pale and bruised, the color of old paper soaked in ink. You rise slowly, your joints aching as if the night itself had pressed its weight upon you. The streets are emptier than before, not because the people are gone, but because something sacred has retreated from the world. Even the call to prayer comes late, the voice cracked and uncertain. Like a boy trying to sound like a man, you pass the old market square, where once every stall sang with the music of barter and gossip and now only a few linger. An old man selling boiled eggs no one buys, a girl threading copper wire into broken beads, a blind scribe writing verses no one commissioned. The great dome of the Beit al-Hikmah is a blackened husk now, its ribs exposed to the sky, and yet, beneath its ruins, you see children stacking stones in careful laundry building, perhaps, or simply playing at remembrance. You do not interrupt them. The war has taken the names, the leaders, the reasons, but not yet the small, ordinary rhythms of resilience. A woman stirs lentils over a flame of dried palm bark. A boy washes the face of a horse too thin to carry anyone. You step past them, hands clasped behind your back, as if inspecting the ruins of your own soul. And as the first light falls across the fractured mosaics, you remember a line your father once whispered to you. Even broken tiles still shine when the sun finds them. And so, the days begin to blur, not in forgetfulness, but in sameness each, are folding gently into the next like parchment pages pressed by time. The war no longer arrives in the form of armies, but in absences, a gate left unguarded, a courtyard that no longer echoes with children's feet, a street where the baker's shutters remain nailed shut for the 20th morning. You mark the passing of time by silences. Where once sermons thundered, now only pigeons gather, pecking at stones once slick with incense and blood. In the madrasa, scrolls lie unopened, their leather cracking like dry skin. Even the river, mighty Tigris, seems unsure of itself, its flow stammering beneath the bridges. As if uncertain it still remembers the route to the sea, you find yourself speaking less, not because you have nothing to say, but because so many who might have listened have vanished, swallowed by edicts, by revenge, by exile. Still, you sweep the mosque floor each dawn. You replace the oil in the lamps. You trim the wick. You recite the verses of patience, not as a sermon, but as a spell to bind the city's broken heart for one more day. Somewhere far beyond, in provinces only spoken of in whispers now, new caliphs argue with old generals. But here, in the war's long shadow, you understand the quiet truth of empires, that it is not the throne that lasts, but the hands that keep sweeping long after the banners fall. Then, one night, as the call to prayer fades into the dusk like a final thread pulled from ancient cloth, a stranger arrives, hooded and quiet. He does not knock, he waits, standing, still beneath the worn arch of the old mosque gate, where the wind has carved grooves deeper than any sword. You watch him from the alcove, not with suspicion, but with a strange recognition, as if history itself has taken on the shape of a man and returned when he speaks. His voice is soft like parchment turning. He carries no weapon, no badge, only a weathered satchel and the look of one who has walked for years with ghosts. He does not ask for shelter, only direction. But in his eyes, you glimpse the burden of too many wars, of oaths broken beneath crescent moons, of a name once shouted, across battlefields now whispered like a sin. As you light the lamps along the corridor, the stranger follows, not with the stride of a conqueror, but the weary gait of one who has nothing left to lose but memory. And in the stillness that follows, you both understand the caliphate may have shattered, but not all its pieces are lost. Some walk still, barefoot across forgotten thresholds, looking for a final prayer to end their story. The stranger stays the night without sleep, seated beside the old brass brazier, where the coals glow like buried stars. You do not ask his name. Some names are heavy and best left folded in silence. Instead, you brew tea, bitter and dark, pouring it into chipped clay cups once etched with calligraphy now worn smooth by trembling hands. Outside, the wind sifts through the cypress branches like a voice remembering its own funeral. He begins to speak not in stories, but in fragments, a river that turned red, a brother who vanished beneath the minarets of a city no longer on any map, a letter never delivered, sealed with the caliph's signet. You say nothing, you only listen, as you have listened too many before him, each one carrying a ruin in their chest and hoping your quiet presence might soften its edges. He lays an old coin on the table not for payment, but as remembrance. It bears the face of a ruler whose name children no longer learn, whose laws were rewritten by the victors, whose dreams were traded for fortresses. As the brazier dims, you realize the stranger did not come for rest or refuge. He came to be remembered, and perhaps, in your memory, the caliphate endures not as power, but as sorrow shaped into flame, still glowing in the ruins dotted dawn. The stranger is gone. You find no footprints in the dust, no trace of the teacups, not even the coin, only the faint scent of cedar oil and the distant call of a mourning dove, echoing through the broken archway like a voice from another century. You sit by the window where once, long ago, letters were read aloud in the name of the Caliph, and you begin to write not for the world, but for yourself. Not a history, but a remembering. You write of gardens burned in springtime, of warriors who wept in secret, of cities swallowed by their own glory. You write of the war that broke not only empires, but souls, the war that turned cousin against cousin, prayer against prayer, and carved lines between hearts that once beat together under a single banner of faith. You do not judge them. You only trace the grief that still lingers like a ghost in the hallways. The caliphate was not merely lost, it was mourned piece by piece, by those too ordinary to be remembered in books. And now, as your pen moves slowly across the page, you become one of them, a witness to the long echo of a world undone from within, where the truest war was fought not with swords, but with silence. And as the ink dries on that final line, the room seems to exhale a stillness settling into the dust, into the folds of your robe, into the very bones of the house. The war is over, and yet not over. Its ripples stretch forward like cracks in stained glass, catching the morning light. In broken color, you rise and fold the pages into a leather pouch, tucking them beneath the floorboards beside the others, each one a memory no one asked for, each one a quiet act of resistance against forgetting. Outside, the sun creeps across the ruins where jasmine once bloomed. The minarets are shattered, the marble mosaics eaten by time. But here, in this quiet chamber, something still endures, a flicker of breath, of memory, of defiance wrapped in gentleness. You are not a scholar, nor a soldier, nor a prophet. You are a listener, a keeper of ashes. And as the wind carries the scent of distant fires and unseen futures, you close the shutters and whisper a prayer not for victory, but for understanding. Not for the caliphate as it was, but for the hearts it broke, the silence it left behind, and the story that now belongs, quietly and forever, to you. And so it ends not with the roar of armies or the rise of banners, but with a quiet, tired heart. The war that shattered the caliphate did not truly end in fire, but in forgetting. The names once spoken in fear or reverence have faded into dust, and the palaces they built now crumble beneath olive trees and the hush of evening winds. You carry no sword, you light no torch, and yet, by remembering, by holding the ache of it all in your chest as if it were your own, you do something rare, something holy. You honor the broken. You mourn what pride destroyed. You walk softly now, past ruined gates and buried hopes, through the gardens where children once laughed and where silence now grows like wild mint. Let it be known that not in scrolls or marble, but in the hush of those who still care to listen, that power is never eternal and neither is pain. What remains is memory, fragile and flickering, like the last candle before dawn. And if tonight you sleep, let it be in peace. You have kept the story. You have carried the weight. You are not forgotten.